Good day, everyone. Welcome to Deku Universe. Today we are beginning part 1 of What If Deku Had Rebirth as Freddy Fazbear. The fanfiction is created by Mr. Wonder King 12 on archiveofourown.org. Now let's begin. Izuku Midoriya had been in LBR for 14 hours, and when it was finally over, when the screaming and the monitors and the two bright lights had all quieted down into one small, hiccuping sound, she made a promise to herself right there on the DLVRY table. She would never again be afraid of anything. Not really. Not the way she'd been afraid these last 9 months. She had a son now. Everything else was just weather. The nurse set him in her arms before she'd even caught her breath, and Izuku looked down at the wrinkled, furious little face and felt something in her chest crack open and refill all at once. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, hello, hello." He blinked up at her with unfocused dark eyes, made a small sound somewhere between a hiccup and a coo, and Izuku laughed, a wet, exhausted, delighted laugh, and pulled him closer against her hospital gown. The chair beside her bed had stayed empty the whole night. It had been empty for months, if she was honest with herself. Ever since the divorce papers went through and Hisashi packed 2 duffel bags and left without much more than a mumbled apology that smelled like whiskey even at 10 in the morning. She didn't think about him now. There wasn't room. Not with this warm, impossibly small weight settled against her collarbone, working his jaw like he already had opinions about the world he'd just arrived in. "You're going to do something wonderful," she told him, running one finger along the soft curve of his cheek. "I don't know what yet, but I know it." He cooed again, like he agreed. A young doctor peeked in an hour later to check on them both, glanced at the tiny green tuft of hair poking out from under Izuku's cap, and smiled. Good size. Strong lungs, from the sound of him earlier. He made a note on his tablet. "What's his name going to be?" Izuku looked down at her son, who had finally stopped squirming and gone heavy and warm and asleep against her. "Izuku," she said. "It means to grow. 4 years is not very long in the scheme of things, but it is an entire universe to a 4-year-old, and by the time Izuku turned 4, he had already read through 2 of his mother's old college textbooks, the biology one twice, memorized the top 10 hero rankings well enough to recite them at dinner, and developed a habit of narrating his own life out loud in a low, serious mutter whenever he thought no one was listening. "Izuku, sweetheart, dinner." Izuku called from the kitchen one evening and got no response. She found him sitting cross-legged in front of the television, chin propped on his fists, watching grainy footage of a hero named Death Arms lifting a collapsed support beam off a trapped construction worker. "Muscle density," Izuku mumbled, eyes shining. "That's gotta be it, right, Mom? He's not even using his legs for leverage. He looked up at her, cheeks flushed with the fever of a small child who has found something he loves more than anything else in the world. "I want to do that. I want to save people. And I want to smile the whole time I do it, so they know it's going to be okay." Izuku crouched down beside him, brushing a curl of green hair from his face. "Save people and smile. That's a good plan, Izuku." "The best plan," he corrected, very seriously, and she laughed and scooped him up before he could protest, carrying him to the table over her shoulder like a sack of very opinionated rice. He was, by any honest measure, an unusual child. His pediatrician had run him through a routine set of developmental questions and ended up staring at his clipboard for a long moment before quietly suggesting Izuku look into placement testing, because whatever number came back was going to be a big one. He wasn't wrong. But none of it made Izuku strange or cold or distant the way people sometimes imagine a genius 4-year-old might be. If anything, it made him more himself, more delighted by small things, more certain that everyone he met deserved his full attention, more likely to crouch mid-walk to relocate a beetle off the sidewalk before someone stepped on it. "You're going to be somebody's hero someday, too," he informed the beetle, setting it gently in the grass. "Just, a little guy hero." Down the block, a stockier, blonde-haired boy with a permanent scowl watched this whole performance with deep, if grudging, interest. "You're so weird, Deku," Katsuki Bakago announced, arms crossed, the nickname already an old joke between them. Half insult, half endearment, the kind 4-year-old trade without understanding the weight of either half. "Bugs don't need heroes. Everybody needs heroes, Kakin, Izuku said, entirely unbothered, wiping his hands on his shorts. That's the whole point of heroes. But Kago made a face like he wanted to argue and couldn't find the angle. Whatever. Race you to the swings. Last one, there's Quirkless. He took off before he'd even finished the sentence, the way he always did, half a step ahead of everyone, including himself. Izuku laughed and ran after him, and did not think, even once, about the word Bakugo had just used. As an insult, because it hadn't occurred to him yet that it might one day be describing him. The hospital wing where 4-year-olds went to have their quirks confirmed was 3 train stops from the Midoriya apartment, and on the morning of Izuku's appointment, Inko dressed him in his nicest shirt, the one with the little rocket ship on it, and held his hand the entire walk from the station and did not let go even once, not because she thought anything was wrong, but because she loved the way his small fingers curled around 2 of hers. The waiting room was full of other 4-year-olds and their parents. A little girl across from them kept lighting up her own fingertip like a match and blowing it out again, giggling every time, while her father tried and failed to get her to stop showing off in public. A boy near the door had discovered he could stretch his earlobes to an alarming length and was doing so, gleefully, to the visible horror of the receptionist. Izuku watched all of it with huge, fascinated eyes, tugging his mother's sleeve to point out every manifestation like she might have somehow missed it. Mom, did you see he can? Her fingers on fire. That's so cool. I wonder if it's heat-based or actual combustion. I saw, sweetheart, Inko said, smiling. What do you think mine's going to be? Izuku asked, swinging his sneakers, not quite touching the floor. I hope it's a helping one. Not just a cool one. A helping one. I think, Inko said, cupping his face in both hands, that whatever it is, you're going to use it exactly like that. A nurse called his name. The exam didn't take long. A doctor, older than the one from the DLVRY ward, reading glasses pushed up and a gray hair, with the gentle brusqueness of a man who'd done this exact appointment several thousand times, had Izuku sit on the paper-covered table, checked his reflexes, his eyes, asked him to wiggle his fingers and his toes. Then he took Izuku's foot in his hand, turned it very slightly toward the light, and went still in a way Inko noticed immediately, the way you notice weather changing before you can name why. The doctor said. Just that. Is something wrong? Inko asked. He didn't answer right away. He set Izuku's foot down gently, straightened up, looked at his clipboard a moment before he looked at her instead. Mrs. Midoriya, would you mind stepping out with me for just a moment? Izuku, perched on the exam table in his rocket ship shirt, swinging his feet, looked between the 2 adults with the first flicker of real uncertainty Inko had ever seen on his face. Mom, I'll be right back, she told him, and followed the doctor into the hallway. And even before he opened his mouth, she felt the bottom of her stomach go cold, because she had been to enough of these appointments with enough friends' children to know that doctors did not ask you to step into a hallway to deliver good news. Your son, the doctor said, in the low, careful voice reserved for exactly this, has 2 joints in his pinky toe. Inko stared at him. I don't understand what that means. It means he doesn't have a quirk, Mrs. Midoriya, and he never will. The hallway seemed to tilt very slightly. There's no chance it's just late? Inko heard herself ask, hating how small her voice sounded. I've heard of children not showing anything until they're 5, even 6. The joint is the tell, the doctor said, not unkindly. It's not about timing. His body simply never made the adjustment every quirk child carries. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you were hoping to hear. Inko put a hand against the wall. The doctor hesitated, glancing through the small window at the boy still swinging his feet, humming to himself, oblivious. For what it's worth, he added, and his voice actually softened here, into something like wonder, I ran him through the standard cognitive screening while you filled out the intake forms. I don't say this often, Mrs. Midoriya, but that little boy in there is exceptional. Off the charts, actually. I'll recommend further testing, but unofficially, as one professional to a mother who deserves to hear something good today, whatever this diagnosis takes from him, it did not take that. Not even close. It was, Inko would think much later, an act of real kindness that a tired doctor at the end of a long morning took the time to say that instead of just handing her a pamphlet. It did not make the floor stop tilting, but she held on to it anyway, the way you hold on to anything solid when the rest of the world has gone soft and unfamiliar under your feet. She went back in. Izuku looked up at her, and whatever was on her face must have told him something, because the humming stopped. "Mom? What's wrong?" Inko crossed the room and pulled him into her arms right there on the exam table, rocket ship shirt and all, and held him the way she'd held him the day he was born, like the rest of the world could wait. "Nothing's wrong with you," she told him fiercely into his hair. "Do you hear me, Izuku? Nothing is wrong with you." He didn't understand yet, not really. But 4-year-olds are not stupid, whatever else they may be, and he understood enough to go very quiet and small in her arms, and to ask, in a tiny voice muffled against her shoulder, "Am I not going to get a quirk?" Inko closed her eyes. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're not." He didn't cry at the hospital. He waited until they were home, until his shoes were off and his rocket ship shirt was hung back in the closet where it belonged, and then he sat on the edge of his bed and cried the quiet, confused, utterly wrecked tears of a child who has just learned the world runs on rules he didn't know existed and cannot ever change. Inko sat with him. She didn't try to fix it because she didn't know how, and some instinct told her that talking him out of his grief before he'd finished having it would only make things worse. So she just sat, rubbing slow circles on his back, and let him cry until there was no crying left in him, and then made his favorite dinner, katsudan, because some things are true regardless of quirks, and they ate it together on the couch instead of at the table, a rule break so enormous that even at 4 he understood it was meant as a kindness. It was 3 days later that she found the video for him. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been half watching the evening news while folding laundry, and there was grainy footage from years back, a towering blonde figure hauling over 100 people out of the collapsing building one after another, smiling the entire time like there was nowhere else in the world he'd rather be. The newscaster called him the #1 hero, called him a symbol. Izuku wandered in halfway through, drawn by the noise, and stood frozen in the doorway with a stuffed dinosaur hanging forgotten from one hand. "Who's that?" he breathed. Inko paused the laundry folding. "That's All Might, sweetheart." "He's smiling," Izuku said, wonderingly, as if this were the single most remarkable detail in the whole clip. More remarkable than the 100 people, more remarkable than the collapsing building, even carrying all those people. "He's smiling the whole time." "I suppose he is." Izuku sat down right where he was, cross-legged on the carpet, and didn't move again until the segment ended and looped back to the anchor's desk. When he finally turned to look at his mother, his face had an expression on it Inko hadn't seen there before, something that looked almost like hunger. "Mom, can I still be like him? Even without a quirk? Can I still save people and smile the whole time?" This was the question Inko would field, in one form or another, more times over the coming years than she could ever count. On birthdays, on the anniversary of the diagnosis, which he never seemed to forget even though she never marked it on any calendar. On ordinary evenings when the news played some new act of heroism, and something in his chest visibly ached with wanting. He would ask, in his small, solemn way, whether it was still possible, and every single time, Inko would feel her heart break freshly down the exact same fracture line, and every single time, she would not have a real answer to give him. That first time, she didn't even manage words. She just pulled him in her lap, this too big 4-year-old who insisted he was too old for laps except for exactly this kind of moment, and cried in his hair, and said the only true thing she had. "I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry." He didn't understand, not fully, that her apology wasn't really an answer. He understood, in the vague, absorbent way small children understand important things, that his mother was sad, and that it had something to do with him, and hero business, and so, because he loved her, and because some children are simply built with an instinct to comfort rather than be comforted, he patted her hair the way she so often patted his, and said, "It's okay, Mom. I'm going to do it anyway. I'll figure it out." He did not, of course, know how, but he said it like a promise, with the total, uncomplicated conviction 4-year-olds attach to everything, no idea yet how heavy a promise like that would get. over the years on a pair of shoulders that would have to grow up mostly alone. Word travels fast in a neighborhood as small as theirs, and faster through a kindergarten class. And by the time Izuku returned to school that week, everyone already knew. Bakugo found out on the playground, from another kid, delivered with the gleeful cruelty 5-year-olds specialize in and haven't yet learned to feel ashamed of. Deku's quirkless, the kid said, like he was reporting the weather. My mom said, no quirk, ever. Bakugo's reaction surprised even himself, though he'd spend the next decade insisting it hadn't. Something in his chest went hot and strange and defensive, in a way he had no language for yet, and would misname, for years, as contempt. He found Izuku by the swings at recess, and stood in front of him with his hands jammed in his pockets, and his jaw set. Is it true? Izuku, who was having the single worst week of his short life, and in no condition to manage this conversation gracefully, just nodded. You're really not going to get one? Ever? Another nod. Something in Bakugo's face did something complicated, something that might, in a kinder retelling, have been mistaken for fear, though he'd never in his life admit to that translation. What came out his mouth instead was, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. How are you going to be a hero if you don't even have a quirk? You can't. You're not going to be anything. He said it fast, almost desperate, like saying it firmly enough would stop it from being frightening. You're worthless, Deku. Quirkless people can't do anything. It was the first time anyone had said the word to Izuku's face like that. Not as information, but as a verdict, and hearing it from Kakin specifically, from the boy who'd raced him to the swings 100 times and called him weird with genuine fondness, made it land somewhere much deeper than it would have from a stranger. Izuku didn't have an answer ready. He just stood there while a small crowd of classmates gathered close enough to listen, and close enough, within the week, to start repeating the verdict themselves, the casual, thoughtless way children repeat anything that gets a reaction. Quirkless. Worthless. Can't do anything. Even a teacher, overhearing part of it and misjudging the moment entirely, told Izuku not to take it so personally, that not everyone can be a hero, and there's nothing wrong with a nice, safe office job, in a tone clearly meant kindly and landing like one more brick on the pile. It did not break him. That part of the story was true, and Inko would tell people, years later with a fierce kind of pride, that it never did. That her son went to school every day after that with his chin up and a notebook tucked under his arm, still taking notes on every act of heroism the news would show him, still narrating his own life out loud when he thought no one was listening, still crouching down to move beetles off the sidewalk. But something in him changed quietly and permanently in that first bad week. He learned, very young, exactly what his dream was going to cost him, and he decided, with the same uncomplicated conviction he'd once used to promise his crying mother he'd figure it out, that he was going to pay it anyway. That night, Inko found him at his little desk with a fresh notebook open in front of him, green ink already bleeding across the first page in careful, cramped handwriting. Quirk analysis, page 1, MT lady. You're still doing this? She asked softly from the doorway. Izuku didn't look up right away. He finished the sentence he was writing. Something about muscle-to-mass ratios, something well beyond what any 6-year-old should reasonably know, and then looked at her with the small, stubborn, achingly familiar smile she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for and terrified of in equal measure. Somebody's got to figure out how all this works, Mom, he said. Might as well be me. The years that followed fell into a kind of rhythm, the way hard things eventually do. Notebooks piled up on his shelf, 7, then 12, then more than either of them bothered counting. Each one filled front to back in the same cramped handwriting. Bakugo's scorn-hardened, year by year, into something colder and more practiced, like a callous groan over an old wound neither of them ever talked about. Teachers came and went, some kind, most simply indifferent, a few unkind in the careless way adults can be toward a child they've already decided isn't going to amount to much. And on certain nights, not every night, not even every month, but often enough that Inko learned to recognize the particular quiet way Izuku would drift toward the television. The old debut footage would come back on, and the same question would come with it, and Inko would give her son the same answer she'd been giving him since he was 4 years old, because it was still the only true one she had. She never once tried to talk him out of it. Not when the bullying got worse. Not when the notebooks piled higher. Not when other children stopped inviting him to anything at all. She just kept kissing the top of his head and let her son keep doing, quietly and stubbornly and against every reasonable expectation the world had already set for him, the only thing he had ever really wanted to do. Save people, and smile the whole time doing it. He had no idea yet what shape that promise was eventually going to take. None of them did. 10 years is a long time to carry a promise made at 4 years old. And by the time Izuku Midoriya turned 14, the promise had outgrown the boy who made it in almost every way except the ones that mattered. The notebook shelf in his bedroom had become notebook shelves, plural. 31 of them now, spines lined up by date in handwriting that had gone from a 4-year-old's careful block letters to a 14-year-old's fast, cramped scrawl. Every page still filled with the same obsessive devotion to a dream that had no earthly business surviving this long. He couldn't punch. He couldn't fly. He couldn't so much as levitate a penciled away poor Davis Ramirez, a man Izuku had never met and never would, in a life this version of him was living, could at least manage on a bad day. What Izuku could do was notice things. He noticed the exact angle death arms bend his knees before a lift. He noticed that Kemui Woods favored his left side when extending, which meant an old injury nobody had ever reported publicly. He noticed everything, cataloged everything, and hoped, with the same stubborn, uncomplicated hope he'd had at 4, that noticing would someday be enough. It rarely felt like enough. Not at school, where Quirkless had long since calcified from an insult into simply a fact everyone recited about him. The way you'd mention someone was left-handed. Not at home, either. Not really. Though Inko never said an unkind word, never once looked at him like he was less than everything she'd hoped for. But even a mother's love has limits on what it can drown out, and some mornings the noise from school followed him home anyway, humming under his skin like static. This particular morning, the noise hadn't caught up to him yet. This particular morning, he was still just a boy walking to school with his newest notebook under his arm, phone buzzing every few seconds with breaking news alerts, and something enormous rampaging 4 blocks away. The crowd had already gathered by the time Izuku got there, packed 3 deep behind the sagging yellow barrier tape, necks craned, phones raised. He wedged himself between a woman with a stroller and a teenager filming everything on a battered phone, and got his first look at the villain. It was enormous, 12, maybe 14 feet of lumpy, swollen muscle, its skin stretched tight and shiny over a frame that looked like it might split at the seams if it took one more step. It had clearly used its quirk somewhere it shouldn't have, probably to strong-arm cash out of a convenience store 2 streets back, and now it was too big to fit down the alley. It had tried to escape through, roaring and flailing at the hero already in its way. Kemui Woods, Izuku breathed, already reaching for his notebook. The wood user was a blur of green and brown, launching himself off a lamppost with an arc that made the crowd gasp. And where his arm should have ended, hardened wooden limbs erupted instead, lashing out and wrapping around the villain's legs in tight, overlapping coils. The giant bellowed and stumbled, off balance, and Kemui Woods called out something crisp and controlled about the illegal use of a quirk in a public space, his voice carrying easily over the crowd noise. The kind of voice built for exactly this, for being heard and believed. He's using the coils as both a restraint and a lever, Izuku muttered, pen already moving, eyes locked on the wooden tendrils cinching tighter with every twist of the villain's torso. Reinforced along the grain. Has to be. Regular wood would splinter under that kind of torque. He didn't get to finish the thought. A shadow the size of a DLVRY truck fell over the whole street, and a voice rang out, delighted and enormous, and entirely too pleased with itself for the situation. Sorry, boys. Looks like I've got this one. The crowd's attention snapped upward, and Izuku's stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with fear, because there she was, easily 60 feet tall, blonde hair whipping in a self-generated wind, thigh-high boots the size of city buses, stepping clean over 3 parked cars like they were curbstones. MT Lady. Her debut. He'd read about the announcement 2 weeks ago and circled the date on his calendar like other kids circle concert tickets. She didn't wait for an invitation. One long leg swept out in a single, devastating arc, catching the giant square in the side and sending him crashing sideways into a construction barrier with a boom that rattled windows 2 blocks down. Kamui Woods' wooden coils snapped loose, sent flying, and the crowd erupted. Not for him, but for her, dozens of phones angling up at once as she planted a boot on the villain's chest and flashed a blinding smile at absolutely nobody in particular. There we go. And that's today's debut, everyone. I'll take it from here. She struck a pose, hip-cocked, radiant, and the crowd went wild in a way that had very little to do with justice and a great deal to do with the sheer, cinematic spectacle of her existing. Izuku barely noticed the theatrics. He was scribbling so fast his handwriting had dissolved into something only he could read. Gigantification, he mumbled, tearing through calculations under his breath. Has to have some kind of proportional strength scaling, otherwise the joint stress alone at that mass would. Unless the quirk reinforces the skeletal structure too, which would explain why she doesn't just collapse under her own weight the second she. You want to be a hero someday, kid? Izuku blinked up. An older man beside him, work boots, hard hat under one arm, clearly on his way to a job site before the show interrupted his commute, was watching him with mild, good-natured amusement. Yes, sir, Izuku said, tucking the notebook against his chest like it might fly away. That's the plan, anyway. Good luck to you, then. The man clapped him once on the shoulder, easy and unthinking, the kind of gesture that meant nothing to him and everything to Izuku, who had learned a long time ago to treasure small kindnesses like this because they arrived so rarely from people his own age. World could use a few more kids taking notes instead of just watching. I'll do my best, Izuku said, and meant it with his whole chest, the way he meant everything. He watched until MT Lady finished her victory lap for the cameras, until Backdraft's team hosed down a small kitchen fire the villain had somehow started in the chaos, until the ambulance rolled the still groaning giant away in restraints built for someone his size. Then he checked his watch, swore under his breath in the mild way his mother had taught him to swear, and sprinted the last 6 blocks to homeroom. He made it with 90 seconds to spare, sliding into his desk just as the second bell rang. Breathing hard, cheeks flushed with the particular joy of having witnessed something incredible and having to sit still about it for the next 6 hours. Nice of you to join us, Midoriya, said Mr. Sato, not looking up from the stack of papers he was straightening at the front of the room. He wasn't a cruel teacher. Not exactly. Just tired and long past the point of expecting much from the back 3 rows. Settle down, everyone. I've got your future course questionnaires here. And yes, before anyone asks, he raised his voice slightly over the immediate rustle of interest. I already know what all of you are going to write. Hero course, hero course, hero course. Every single year. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Near the window, Katsuki Bakugo didn't laugh. He leaned back in his chair with his boots kicked up against the desk in front of him, arms crossed, radiating the specific, magnetic arrogance of a boy who had never once in his life doubted where he was headed. Don't lump me in with the rest of these extras, he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, not even glancing at whoever's chair he'd just insulted. I'm not just filling out a form and hoping. I'm getting into UA's hero course, top of the entrance exam, guaranteed. You don't know that for sure, Bakugo, someone near the front said, more amused than offended. I do, actually, Bakugo shot back, grinning with too many teeth. Aced the mock exam last week. Perfect score. You know what that means? It means by the time I'm done with UA, I'm not stopping at number 2, number 3, any of that garbage. I'm taking All Might's spot. Number 1. Watch. A couple of kids groaned. Most of them laughed along anyway, because it was easier to laugh with Bakugo than to be the one he decided to burn through next, and everyone in that classroom had learned that lesson at some point over the years, usually the hard way. Mr. Sato sighed, the particular sigh of a man who'd had this exact conversation every year for a decade and stopped being surprised by it around year 4. Yes, well, UA's exam is no joke, Bakugo, so I hope that confidence is backed up by more than a mock test. He shuffled through the stack in his hands. Speaking of which, Midoriya, you're applying too, correct? The room went quiet in that specific, ugly way rooms go quiet right before something bad happens. Every head turned. Izuku felt it land on him like a physical weight. 30 pairs of eyes, most of them already curling into smiles that had nothing kind in them. He kept his own eyes on his desk. "Yes, sir. I am." The laughter started small, somewhere near the back, and rolled forward like a wave until half the classroom was in on it. Open and unbothered, the kind of cruelty that doesn't even register as cruelty to the people doing it, because it's just what you do to Izuku Midoriya. It's just the joke that's always been there. "Wait, seriously?" One boy near the front managed between laughs. "Midoriya's going for the hero course? What's he gonna do? Write the villain a strongly worded essay?" "He can't even do the mile run without stopping," someone else added. "How's he gonna survive an entrance exam that has people getting launched into obstacle courses?" "I heard the practical portion has actual combat robots," a girl said, giggling behind her hand. "No offense, Midoriya, but you'd get flattened in like 4 seconds. Izuku's ears burned. He kept his voice level, the way he always did, because he found a long time ago that reacting only ever made it worse. "I'm not trying to compete with anyone specific," he said, mostly to his desk. "I just want to try. I want to know if it's possible unless I actually go for it." "It's not possible," Bakugo said. The room quieted again, differently this time. Not gleeful, just attentive, because Bakugo's voice had dropped into the register he used when he actually meant something instead of just performing for an audience. "It's not a maybe, Deku," he said, and there was something under the contempt that Izuku, if he'd been looking, might have recognized as old and complicated and not entirely about him at all. "It's not possible. You don't have a quirk. There's no version of the exam where that stops matching. Give it up already." "I appreciate the concern, Kakin," Izuku said quietly, which only made Bakugo's jaw tighten further, because he hated that nickname now the way he'd once worn it like a badge. "But I'm still going to try." Bakugo didn't answer that. He just looked at Izuku for a long moment with an expression that was harder to name than simple scorn, and then looked away, out the window, jaw working, and said nothing else for the rest of the PRD. It should have felt like a small victory. It didn't, not really. It never did. He should have known Bakugo wasn't finished. He always knew, somewhere underneath the hope he kept insisting on having anyway. And he was right. The final bell rang, and the classroom emptied out in the usual noisy scramble, backpacks and scraping chairs, and a dozen overlapping conversations about nothing, except Izuku's row, where Bakugo lingered by the window with 2 of his usual shadows, watching Izuku gather his things with a look that made the hair on the back of Izuku's neck stand up. "Hold up, Deku." Izuku froze halfway through zipping his bag. "Kakin, give me the notebook." "What?" "No, Bakugo crossed the room in 3 strides and yanked it out from under Izuku's arm before he could react, flipping through the pages with a sneer curling his mouth. All those careful diagrams and cramped calculations and years of devotion flashing past under his thumb like nothing at all. "This is it, huh?" Bakugo said low. "This is what you spend all your time on. Hero analysis for the future, volume whatever the hell number." He looked up, and something ugly and almost desperate moved behind his eyes, gone as fast as it came. "You really think this is going to get you into UA? A notebook full of scribbles about quirks you'll never have." "Kakin, please, just give it back." Bakugo's palm ignited. It happened too fast to stop. A sharp crack of sound and heat, and the notebook was gone, blown apart in his grip, pages scattering in scorched, curling fragments across the classroom floor. The remains of the cover, still smoking faintly at the edges, sailed out the open window a second later, tumbling down toward the courtyard 3 stories below. The room had gone dead silent. Even Bakugo's shadows looked faintly startled by how far he'd taken it this time. "Get it through your head," Bakugo said, and his voice had gone low and hard in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. "You're never getting in. You don't have a quirk. You never will. So do everyone a favor. Stop wasting your life on this, and go find something you're actually capable of, because this isn't it, and it's never going to be it." Izuku didn't say anything. There wasn't anything left to say that hadn't already been said, in one form or another, 100 times before. He picked up his bag with hands that weren't quite steady, walked past Bakugo without meeting his eyes, and went to find what was left of 10 years of work scattered across a courtyard like ash. The notebook was ruined. Most of the pages were either burned through or torn loose entirely, some of them already trampled by kids cutting across the courtyard on their way home, oblivious to what they were stepping on. Izuku knelt in the gravel and gathered what he could anyway, smoothing each fragment flat before tucking it into his bag, because even ruined, it felt wrong to just leave it there. He found the cover last, wedged against a drain pipe, half its spine cracked open. Kneeling there with the broken thing in his hands, something old surfaced in him, the way it always did on days like this. Unbidden, familiar, worn smooth from a decade of visits. A hospital hallway, a doctor's careful voice, his own small hand gripping two of his mother's fingers like they were the only solid thing left in the world. He didn't fight the memory anymore, not after all these years. He learned it would come whether he fought it or not, so he just let it pass through him, quiet and aching, the way you let weather pass. He didn't cry. He was 14 now, and he'd used up most of his crying about this particular subject a long time ago. He just breathed for a second, gravel biting into his knees, and then stood up, shouldered his bag, and started the walk home. His phone buzzed twice before he was even out the school gates. Breaking. Villain with fluid, indeterminate body reported near Sakura District. Authorities urge residents to avoid the area. Hero response in progress. Izuku glanced at the article without really absorbing it. Thumb scrolling automatically the way he always did, some corner of his brain filing the words away out of habit, even while the rest of him was still somewhere back in that classroom, still hearing Bakugo's voice telling him to stop wasting his life. He didn't think much of the alert. Villain. Incidents happen constantly in a city this size. This was just one more, somewhere else, somebody else's problem to solve. He should have paid closer attention. He'd learn that later, though by then it wouldn't matter anymore. The walk home cut through a narrow stretch of side streets that ran behind a row of shuttered shops, quieter than a main road, the kind of route he took specifically because it meant fewer people to see his face on days like today. He had his head down, replaying the day in the dull, looping way you replay a bruise by pressing on it. When the smell hit him first, something sour and chemical, wrong in a way his body registered before his mind caught up. Then something enormous and formless slammed into him from the mouth of an alley, and the world went sideways. It didn't have a shape, not really. It was mass, sliding and viscous, closing around him in a cold, suffocating wave that smelled like rot and rusted pipes. Izuku's scream came out half-formed, swallowed instantly as the thing surged up and over his face, forcing itself past his lips, down his throat, filling his lungs with something that wasn't air and wasn't liquid either. His hands clawed uselessly at a body that had no solid surface to grip. His vision sparked white at the edges. Somewhere very far away, he understood, in a distant, floating way, that this was how it ended. Not heroically, not with any of the meaning he'd spent 10 years hoping for, just a random villain in an alley and nobody around to see. Then the world exploded with light and sound. Never fear. The voice cracked through the alley like a thunderclap, and an instant later, something hit the villain with the force of a passing train. A single, colossal punch that tore the creature clean off Izuku's body and sent it splattering across the brick wall in a wet, shapeless mass, dazed, and shrieking in a voice that had no real mouth to shriek with. Izuku hit the ground hard, choking, vision swimming, and the last thing he saw before the darkness closed in was an enormous, golden silhouette standing over him, fists still raised, grinning like the whole ordeal had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience on an otherwise pleasant afternoon. For I am here. Everything went black. He came back slowly, the way you surface from deep water. First sound, then light, then the dull ache of his own body reasserting itself one nerve at a time. He was sitting propped against a wall, someone's oversized jacket draped over his shoulders, and when his eyes finally focused, he found himself looking directly into the broad, impossibly bright smile of the single most famous face in the entire country. Izuku's brain short-circuited entirely. All my, He couldn't even finish the name. His mouth opened and closed twice more, no sound coming out at all, and All Might, genuinely, hugely All Might, crouched right there in front of him at actual, real, unbelievable proximity, laughed a booming, delighted sound that echoed off the alley walls. "Easy there, young man. Take a breath before you pass out on me twice in one afternoon." He held up a familiar, scorched-edged object between two enormous fingers. "This yours? Fell out of your bag during the commotion. I signed it for you while you were out. Hope that's all right." Seemed ashamed to waste the opportunity. Izuku looked down at the water-damaged, half-burned scrap of his notebook cover, and there in bold, unmistakable handwriting across what remained of the front page was an autograph that would have made 4-year-old Izuku weep with joy, and 14-year-old Izuku very nearly did anyway, for entirely different reasons. You signed it," he croaked. I was going to ask. I wanted your autograph since I was 4. I have all your merchandise. I've watched every recorded fight you've ever had. I even tracked your win-loss ratio against." "Huh. I appreciate the enthusiasm, young man, truly," All Might said, holding up a hand, still grinning. Though something in his eyes had gentled, watching this scrawny, soot-streaked kid babble at him with such raw, undiluted devotion. "But let's get you steady first. That was a nasty villain you ran into. Slippery little thing. Wanted to wear you like a suit, if I had to guess, hide from the heroes tracking him. You're lucky I was in the area." "Thank you," Izuku managed. "Really? Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if." "Say no more of it." All Might straightened to his full, towering height, and it was only then that Izuku noticed the 2 soda bottles clutched awkwardly in one massive hand, something dark and viscous churning furiously inside each one, hurling itself against the plastic like it was trying to claw its way back out. Contained the fellow in question, for what it's worth. "He won't be bothering anyone else today." Izuku stared up at him, and the question that had been sitting in his chest for 10 years, the one he'd asked his mother 100 times in 100 different ways, the one that had never once gotten a real answer because his mother, however much she loved him, wasn't the one who could actually give it, rose up his throat before he could stop it. "Can I ask you something? Please." All Might paused, something unreadable crossing his face, like he already sensed where this was headed. "Of course, young man. Do you think," Izuku's hands curled into fists on his knees, "do you think someone without a quirk could ever be a hero? Like you?" The alley went very quiet. All Might didn't answer right away. He set the 2 bottles down carefully against the wall, crouched back down to Izuku's level with a heaviness that hadn't been there a moment ago, and looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was, for the first time since he'd appeared, entirely without its performance. "That's a serious question," he said finally, quietly. The booming showman's voice dropped down into something much more human. "And it deserves a serious answer, so I won't insult you with anything less. You want to know the truth of this job, young man? Being a hero isn't about talent or fame or how many people cheer for you. It's about being willing, every single day, every single time that alarm goes off, to put your own life on the line for someone else's. Villains don't hold back because you're unprepared. The city doesn't wait for you to be ready. If you go out there without the ability to protect yourself, you're not just risking your own life. You're risking the lives of everyone counting on you to save them, because you won't be able to." Izuku's throat had gone tight. "But I've trained my whole life for this. I've studied every hero, every villain, every quirk I could get information on. I don't doubt any of that," All Might said, and it wasn't unkind, which somehow made it worse. "I believe you truly. But knowledge alone doesn't stop a punch. It doesn't put out a fire, or hold up a collapsing building, or outrun a villain twice your size. I wish I could tell you otherwise. I wish, more than almost anything, that I could look at a boy with a heart like yours and tell you the door is open." He set one enormous hand on Izuku's shoulder, gentle despite its size, and his voice dropped further still, worn thin with something that sounded almost like grief on Izuku's behalf. "But if I told you that, I'd be lying to you, and you deserve better than a lie. I'm sorry, but that's the truth of it. Being quirkless in this line of work isn't a disadvantage you can train your way around. It's a wall, and I don't have the right to tell you it isn't there when it is." Izuku sat very still, the words landing somewhere deep and old, right on top of a wound that had never fully closed in the first place. He'd heard versions of this 1,000 times, from doctors, from classmates, from Bakugo not 4 hours ago. But hearing it from him, from the one person whose opinion Izuku had built an entire decade of hope around, hit different than all the others combined. It didn't feel like cruelty. That was almost the worst part. It felt like the truth, delivered as gently as a truth like that could possibly be delivered, and somehow that made it so much heavier than if All Might had simply been cruel about it. "I understand," Izuku said, very quietly, because it was the only thing he could think to say. All Might's face creased with something that looked, for just a moment, like real regret. Not performance, not showmanship, just an enormous man crouched in a dirty alley wishing he had a different answer to give a kid who so clearly deserved one. He opened his mouth like he might say something else, something more, and then one of the soda bottles beside him gave a violent lurch, nearly tipping over as its captive contents hurled themselves against the plastic again. "Ah, blast, hold on now." All Might snatched both bottles up before they could roll away, checking his belt and pockets with a frown. "My apologies, young man. This costume was not designed with proper containment storage in mind, and I seem to have lost my carrying pouch somewhere back near the docks." He crouched, tearing off a long SDRP of the tape from his utility belt and wrapping it hastily around both bottles, securing them awkwardly to his thigh with a brisk, practiced efficiency of a man who had clearly improvised this exact fix more than once before. "There we are. Not elegant, but it'll hold until I reach a proper drop-off point." Izuku watched him work, and for just a moment, so brief he'd wonder later if he'd imagined it, he thought he saw something flicker across All Might's face as he straightened up. Not pain exactly, something more like exhaustion, deep and old, buried under 30 years of practice smiling. It was gone before Izuku could name it. "You'll be all right getting home from here?" All Might asked, all business again the moment passed. "Yes, sir," Izuku said. "Thank you for saving me, and for being honest, even though I didn't want to hear it." Something soft crossed All Might's face at that. "You're a good kid," he said, quiet enough that it felt like it was meant only for the two of them, Allie and all. "Whatever you end up doing with your life, don't lose whatever's making you ask that question in the first place. That part of you is worth something, quirk or no quirk." He straightened to his full height, tape-bound bottles secured, and offered one last enormous smile, though it didn't quite reach all the way to his eyes this time. "Take care of yourself, young man." And then he was gone. A burst of wind and momentum, rooftop to rooftop, gone in 3 bounds like he'd never been there at all, leaving Izuku alone in the alley with a signed, scorched notebook cover and a truth he'd been half expecting his whole life and still hadn't been ready to actually hear. He sat there for a long moment after the sound of All Might's leaps had faded into the ordinary noise of the city. He didn't cry. He was getting good. He thought distantly at not crying. He just sat with it, Bakugo's cruelty and All Might's kindness landing in the exact same place, delivering, in the end, the exact same verdict, and let the weight of the whole day settle over him like something physical. He didn't know how long he sat there. Long enough that the light had shifted, the alley sliding deeper into shadow. Long enough that his legs had gone stiff underneath him. He was still sitting there, notebook cover clutched in one hand, when he heard the footsteps behind him. Well, would you look at this?" Izuku's head snapped up. 3 men had rounded the corner of the alley, blocking the way he'd come, and the one in front, broad-shouldered, missing a front tooth, grinning in a way that had nothing friendly in it, was already cracking his knuckles. "Kid's just sitting here all alone," the man said, taking a slow step forward. "Rough day, huh? Tell you what, you hand over whatever cash you're carrying, and maybe we let you have the rest of it in one piece." Izuku's whole body went cold. "Oh no," he breathed, and then he ran. Later, people who studied incidents like this one for a living would call a matter of seconds. 3, maybe 4. The gap between a boy turning a corner and a boy realizing there was nowhere left to turn. Izuku didn't have time for seconds. He had time for exactly one thought: run, and his body was already obeying it before his mind finished forming the word. "Hey, where you going?" The lead thug's voice cracked out behind him, delighted, unhurried. The voice of a man who'd done this before and knew exactly how it usually ended. He was broad through the shoulders, missing that front tooth, and he grinned around the gap like it was an asset instead of a flaw. "Come on, kid, don't be like that. We just want to talk." "Yeah," said the one behind him, lankier, quicker on his feet. "Real friendly conversation. Got your wallet?" Izuku didn't answer. Answering cost time, and time was the only thing he had left to spend. He bolted. The alley narrowed as he ran, brick walls pressing close on either side, and the sound of his own breathing turned ragged and enormous in his ears, drowning out everything except the heavy, unhurried footfalls closing the distance behind him. His legs screamed after the first block. By the third, his lungs had turned into two fists of fire behind his ribs, and still he ran, because stopping wasn't a decision available to him anymore. Stopping had stopped being a choice somewhere around the second corner, when he glanced back and seen how easily they were keeping pace, like they weren't even trying yet. 5 blocks. He counted them without meaning to, the old obsessive habit of his mind cataloging even this, even now. First block, second, the world narrowing down to brick and shadow and the hammer of his own pulse. He cut left into a side alley on pure instinct, no plan behind it beyond a way, and the alley narrowed further and further, and then simply stopped. A wall. Chain-link fencing bolted over a boarded window, brick on either side, no gap wide enough to squeeze through. A dead end. "Oh no." Izuku breathed, and pressed himself back against the brick like it might swallow him whole if he asked nicely enough. He heard them slow down behind him, unhurried now, footsteps echoing off close walls, and some old, cold, animal part of his brain understood before the rest of him did that this was the part where it stopped being a chase and became something else. His eyes raked the alley for anything. A fire escape, a gap in the fence, a door he'd missed, and found, instead, a narrow gap between two buildings he hadn't noticed on the way. In, barely wide enough for a person, spilling warm yellow light and the tinny, cheerful sound of children's music into the dark. He didn't think. He ran for it. The gap opened into a service alley, and the service alley opened, impossibly, gratefully, into the loading side of a building whose sign, half its neon letters flickering, the rest holding steady in cheerful primary colors, read Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in a font that belonged to a much older, much gentler century than the one Izuku was currently trying to survive. He didn't know the history. He wouldn't have cared if he had. He just knew there were lights and people, and a locked door that swung open the instant a departing family pushed through it from the inside, and he took the opening without a second's hesitation, shoving past the threshold into blinding light and noise and the overwhelming, cloying smell of pizza grease and floor wax. The place was a strange collision of eras. Chrome-edge booths that could have come straight out of an old photograph sat beside sleek holographic arcade cabinets, throwing colored light across the walls. A build that had clearly stood since long before quirks existed. Since before the year 2267 made villain attacks and gigantified heroes and slime monsters as unremarkable as weather. Retrofitted 100 times over, but never quite willing to let go of whatever it had originally been. Somewhere behind the noise of the arcade, tinny recorded music looped through a familiar, bouncing melody, and beneath it, Izuku could just make out the low hum of the stage show still running its evening set. He didn't stop to take any of it in. He shoved through the crowd near the entrance, chest heaving, throat raw, and glanced back once through the glass doors to see 3 shapes rounding the corner of the loading alley behind him. And that single glance nearly cost him everything, because when he turned back around there was a girl directly in front of him, and no time left to stop. They hit hard enough to stagger them both. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," the girl yelped, arms windmilling as she caught her balance against a support post, and then immediately reaching out toward him instead of herself, some reflex of pure decency overriding her own scrambled equilibrium. "Are you okay? You came out of nowhere." "It's fine, really, but I have to." Izuku's eyes were already sliding past her, back toward the doors, where the crowd had begun to part around 3 figures who did not belong in a family pizzeria on a Monday evening and clearly didn't care that they didn't. "But what?" The girl's brow furrowed. Genuine concern, not performance, the kind of open, unguarded worry that came easily to people who hadn't yet learned the world could punish them for it. She had dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, a pizzeria polo with a name tag that read Sajva pinned, slightly crooked, and the particular flustered energy of someone who'd probably just gotten off a shift and was in no way prepared for whatever was happening to her evening. "You're shaking." She reached out again, hand landing gently against his forehead, like she was checking for a fever, an instinct so purely, uselessly kind that under any other circumstance it might have made Izuku laugh. The moment her palm touched his skin, the world went wrong. Sajva Kuja had known about her quirk since she was 6 years old, when she'd shaken hands with a dying goldfish cupped in her palms and felt something in her own chest lurch sideways in sympathy, though she hadn't understood what she was feeling until years later, after the testing, after the careful, clinical explanations that made her stomach turn even as they made a strange kind of sense. She knew the name of it. She'd read the pamphlet. She understood, in the distant, textbook way you understand something that has never actually happened to you at full power, that her quirk was called ghost transference, Yuri Tenai, an emitter-type ability that let her reach past skin and bone into the place where a person's actual self lived and move it, if she wanted to, into somewhere else entirely. She had never wanted to. Not once, not really. The full mechanics of it lived in her mind, mostly as warning rather than possibility, that a single touch of two hands, hers against a living thing, hers against a vessel, living or otherwise, could tear a soul loose from its body and drop it somewhere new. That a soul poured into another living creature kept its whole self, its memories, its mind, waking up fluent and intact behind unfamiliar eyes. That a soul poured into something that had never been alive at all didn't just move in, but changed, twisted by the quirk itself into something the textbooks called a paranormal core, granting it a flickering, spectral kind of life that could bend light and curdle warm air to frost, and, if the will behind it was strong enough, move its new body with something like telekinesis layered over metal and wire. She knew, too, about the toll it took on her. The whispers that lingered afterward, faint traces of every soul she'd ever touched, murmuring somewhere behind her own thoughts. The migraines that came with anything stronger than a passing brush. The terrifying edge case, only ever theoretical to her, where enough raw spiritual force moving through her all at once could scramble her sense of which body was actually hers to begin with. She knew all of it. She had simply never expected any of it to matter on a Monday evening, closing out a shift, catching a stranger's kid before he could fall. Her quirk didn't ask permission. It never really had. It activated on instinct, not intention, some old defensive reflex buried under 6 years of never quite trusting her own hands, and the tidal wave of raw terror rolling off the boy in front of her hit that reflex like a lit match to gas. A thin blue light, invisible to anyone but her, sparked at her fingertips. She felt it a half-second before it happened, felt the pull, the horrible, magnetic want, and yanked her hand back on pure reflex, too late, already too late, because the light had already flared and something had already caught, a hook sinking down through skin and bone into whatever lay underneath both, latching onto the boy's essence with a grip she had never asked for and now couldn't undo. For Izuku, the entire world came apart at once. There was no warning, no gradual slide, just a sudden, violent unplugging, a freezing electrical shock detonating at the base of his skull and erasing every thought. Behind it, in a single silent thunderclap, the cheerful lights of the pizzeria bled instantly into gray. The music, the chatter, the frantic drum of his own heartbeat, all of it collapsed into a silence so complete it felt like the inside of deep space, a silence with weight and pressure behind it. He couldn't feel the BLD moving in his veins anymore. He couldn't feel the floor under his sneakers, or the ache in his lungs from 5 blocks of running, or any part of the body he had lived inside for 14 years. It all simply faded, the way a dream fades the instant you understand you're dreaming it. His limbs stopped answering him. He was a marionette whose strings had been cut all at once, violently, without warning or mercy, and his body folded to the checkered floor in a loose, boneless heap, eyes rolling back, while somewhere above it, no longer tethered to any of it, his soul hung suspended as a small captive sphere of light in a stranger's shaking palm. And Sajva, staring down at what she was holding, disbelieving, horrified, understood immediately that whatever this was, it was nothing like anything she had ever touched before. She had touched the flickering, dim light of petty bullies. She had touched, once, out of morbid curiosity, the pale, guttering spark of a dying stray cat behind the restaurant. Those had been wisps. Embers. This was a star. It burned in her hand like something barely contained, dense with a decade's worth of stubborn, aching, undefeated hope, and it screamed, not in terror, but in something closer to grief, a decade of dreams and disappointments and quiet promises made to a crying mother, all of it pouring directly into her skull in a single unbearable wave. Sajva cried out and staggered, tears spilling down her face before she even understood why, the sheer weight of that willpower pressing against the inside of her mind like something trying to claw its way free. What the hell? The lead thug's voice cut through her daze, close now, closer than she'd registered. He'd shoved through the last of the crowd and found the boy already on the floor, the girl clutching her head like she'd been struck. You defenderin' this loser? Get out of the way, girly! He didn't wait for a response. His hand hit her shoulder, hard, and the shove sent her stumbling backward, disoriented, the psychic agony still roaring behind her eyes, robbing her of whatever balance she had left. Her heel caught on a raised floor panel. Her back slammed into the edge of the stage with enough force to knock the breath out of her, and the hand still cupped protectively around the small, blazing star of Izuku's soul came down against something solid, something covered in matted brown fur. The Freddy Fazbear animatronic's foot. The transfer happened faster than thought. The supercharged, free-floating spirit of Izuku Midoriya, still screaming its silent, decade-old scream, poured out of Sajva's grip and straight down into the still, dormant machine beside the stage, and the pressure in her skull vanished all at once. So suddenly it left her dizzy, gasping, blinking against a world that had gone strange and swimming at the edges. She looked down. The boy hadn't moved. Hey, kid. Her voice came out small, cracked, all the earlier chirpy warmth gone out of it. She dropped to her knees. Beside him, hands hovering, afraid to touch him again, afraid of what her own hands might do without her permission a second time. Kid, come on, wake up, please. He didn't wake up. The thugs had gone very still, all three of them now, staring at the boy on the floor and the girl beside him with an expression that had curdled from predatory into something closer to fear. What the hell did you do? The lanky one whispered, backing up a step. I don't. Sajva's hand was shaking. Her head was pounding, a migraine so vicious it felt like her skull was splitting down the middle. And underneath the pain, something else was happening, a gap opening, a hole burning itself in her memory in real time, erasing the last 30 seconds even as she lived through them. She would remember, later, only fragments, a collision, a boy's terrified face, a flash of blue light she couldn't explain. She would never remember her own hand against his forehead. She would never remember touching the bear. Did she kill him? The lead thug breathed, taking his own step back now, all three of them edging toward the door like the pizzeria itself had turned hostile. I didn't do anything, Sajva said, and her voice cracked on the last word, because some part of her, some part that had no access to the memory, but every access to the guilt, already knew that wasn't true, even if she couldn't say why. The thugs ran. Nobody stopped them. In the chaos of a stage show still playing to a dwindling dinner crowd, three men shoving out through the front doors barely registered as anything more than rude customers leaving in a hurry. And by the time anyone thought to ask about them, they were gone, swallowed by the ordinary evening traffic outside, never to be found, never to be charged with anything, because as far as any official record would ever show, no crime had actually been committed against the boy on the floor. Nobody had laid a hand on him except a girl who was, herself, unraveling in real time. Sajva stayed. She would tell people later, the officers, the detectives, anyone who asked, that she didn't know why she stayed, except that leaving felt like the one thing she absolutely could not do, guilt she couldn't name pinning her to the floor beside a boy she'd known for less than a minute. She was the one who screamed for help. She was the one who kept pressing 2 fingers to his throat every 30 seconds, hoping each time for something that never came back, some flutter of pulse that would mean this whole nightmare could still be undone. It couldn't. There is a particular cruelty in how quickly the world moves on around a tragedy it hasn't fully noticed yet. The stage show finished its set. Families gathered their coats and half-eaten pizza and shuffled toward the exit, most of them entirely unaware that 30 feet away, near the edge of the stage, a girl was sobbing over a boy who would not wake up. It was a manager, finally, cutting through the dining room during closing duties, who found them and understood immediately that this was not a fainting spell or a bad reaction to too much soda, and it was the manager who made the calls that mattered. First to emergency services, then, once the uniforms arrived and started asking questions neither Sajva nor anyone else could fully answer, to whoever in the building's back office kept a working line to the local precinct. It took time after that. It always does. Paramedics confirmed what the manager already suspected and covered the boy where he lay rather than moving him, because a scene like this one required more than an ambulance. It required detectives and a coroner and eventually a pair of heroes on retainer with the local precinct who specialized in quirk-related deaths that didn't have an obvious cause. They found a backpack first, still slung half off one shoulder. Inside it, along with 31 years' worth of habit distilled into a single scorched, water-stained notebook cover, they found a student ID. Izuku Midoriya, Aldera, Junior High. It took another hour to trace the address, and longer still for someone to actually place the call because these things are never simple, and because the officer given the job that night, a woman near the end of a long shift, dreading exactly this part of it, needed a moment herself before she could make her voice sound steady enough to say the words out loud. For hours after Izuku Midoriya collapsed on the floor of Freddy Fazbear's pizza, his mother's phone rang. Inko had already tried calling him 11 times by then. She'd started worrying around 7, when he still wasn't home from what should have been a short walk, told herself he'd probably stop somewhere to take notes on some hero sighting, the way he always did, the way that used to make her smile with a mix of exasperation and pride instead of dread. By 8:30, she'd stopped pretending to watch television and started pacing instead, phone clutched in one hand, refreshing nothing in particular. By 9, she'd called the school, though of course no one answered a locked building at that hour. By the time her phone actually rang, unfamiliar number, local area code, she had already convinced herself of at least 4 different terrible things, and answered before the second ring finished. Is this Inko Midoriya? A woman's voice, careful in a way that made Inko's stomach drop before another word was said. Yes, this is she. Is this about my son, Izuku? Ma'am, I need you to come to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza on. The address followed, and Inko was already grabbing her coat before the officer finished giving it, already moving toward the door on legs that didn't feel entirely like her own. There's been an incident involving your son. I can't share more over the phone. Please come as soon as you're able. And please, drive carefully. Please drive carefully is, in its own quiet way, one of the more devastating sentences in the language, because it means someone already knows something you don't and is trying, in the only way policy allows, to keep you from losing a second child on the way to grieving the first. Inko didn't remember most of the drive. She remembered running 2 red lights she would never have run under any other circumstance. She remembered her hands shaking too hard to properly grip the wheel, and gripping it anyway. She remembered pulling up outside a building she'd driven past 100 times without ever really seeing it, now lit up with the cold, indifferent flash of police lights. An ambulance parked at an angle across 2 spaces, a cluster of officers and a pair of uniformed heroes standing in a loose, grim circle near the front doors. She was out of the car before it had fully stopped rolling. Dr. Takeda had done this more times than he liked to count, and it had never once gotten easier, and some quiet, tired part of him hoped it never would, because the day it stopped hurting was probably the day he needed to find a different line of work entirely. He watched the woman come through the doors. Inko Midoriya, according to the file already forming in his head, 38, single mother, one child, and recognized instantly the particular kind of desperate, searching hope on her face, the hope of a parent who has been told there's an incident and not yet told there's a body, still holding on to every possible version of tonight that didn't end in the worst one. He approached slowly, the way he always did, careful not to close the distance between them too fast, as if giving her a few extra seconds of not knowing was a kindness he could still offer even when nothing else was left to give. Ms. Midoriya. He knelt, not directly in front of her, angled slightly to the side, so she wouldn't feel cornered by what was coming. My name is Dr. Takeda. I'm so sorry for your loss. The words landed exactly the way they always did, like a physical blow, like the floor dropping out from under someone still standing on it. No, Inko whispered, and her knees buckled, and one of the officers moved to catch her before she went all the way down, guiding her instead to sit heavily on the low retaining wall outside the entrance. No, there's some mistake. Please. Where is he? I need to see him. Where's my son? We do need you to come identify him. When you're ready, Dr. Takeda said gently. I know this isn't. There's no version of this conversation that's easier to have. I wish there were. He paused, choosing his next words with the particular care of a man who had learned, over many years, exactly how much truth a person in this state could actually absorb. He was broad and unresponsive. Our team did everything we could once we reached him, but by the time paramedics arrived, there wasn't anything left to bring back. I'm told the response time was as fast as it could have been, given the circumstances of the scene. I don't say that to make it easier. I say it because I don't want you carrying around a version of tonight where 5 more minutes would have changed anything. It wouldn't have. It was, in its own clinical way, a kindness, an attempt to close off one particular avenue of guilt before it could take root. Because Dr. Takeda had watched enough parents disappear down that exact hallway of, if only to know how badly it could hollow a person out over the following months and years. Inko didn't hear the kindness in it. Not yet. All she heard was confirmation, over and over, that the very worst thing she had ever imagined was now simply true, present tense, forever. My baby, she said, and her voice had gone somewhere small and broken that Dr. Takeda would remember, uncomfortably, for longer than most. My Izuku. Please no. Not my Izuku. Ms. Midoriya. His voice firmed, not unkindly, but with the necessary weight of man who had to get through the next several sentences whether either of them wanted to or not. I know, and I am so sorry. But I do need you to come with me now. We need to understand what happened to him, and we need you to help us do that. Please, don't make this harder than it already has to be. Something in Inko finally broke all the way open, not quietly, not gently, but with a single rag sob that seemed to tear its way up out of somewhere far beneath the ordinary reach of grief, a sound so raw that 2 officers standing nearby looked away, unable to keep watching. She said his name 3 more times, smaller each time, like saying it enough might somehow call him back. And then, finally, exhausted past the point of resistance, she nodded and let Dr. Takeda help her to her feet and followed him inside. She would remember almost nothing of what came next with any real clarity. Not the hallway, not the sheet, not the careful, practiced way Dr. Takeda angled his body to give her privacy for the worst moment of her life. She would remember instead small, useless, unbearable details. That his hair still had a leaf caught in it from somewhere along his walk home. That his hand, when she held it one last time, was already cold in a way that felt like the single most wrong thing she had ever touched. That somewhere outside, a family was laughing about something, oblivious on their way to their car, and the sound of it felt like the cruelest thing in the entire world. The paramedics moved with a quiet, practiced reverence once she'd said what needed to be said. The crowd of onlookers, having gotten their answer to whatever tragedy they'd sensed unfolding, began to drift away, morbid curiosity satisfied. The 2 heroes on scene packed up their gear, their job of crowd control finished, and one of them, young, new to the badge, clearly still in use to nights like this one, lingered a moment longer than necessary near the stage, looking up at the still, silent shape of the Freddy Fazbear animatronic standing frozen in its evening pose, blue eyes catching the ambient light in a way that almost looked, for just a second, like it was looking back. It wasn't, of course. Not yet. Whatever had poured into that motionless body an hour earlier hadn't surfaced. Wouldn't, for 3 more days. The bear stood exactly where it always stood, unmoving, ordinary, and the hero shook off whatever strange feeling had crossed him and walked away without a second thought. By midnight, the lights had all packed up and gone. By 1, the last officer had left, and the manager had locked the front doors behind a closing crew that worked in unusually tense silence. And Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, after the barest, most begrudging pause for decency, reopened for business the very next afternoon, because the electricity bill didn't care about tragedy, and the owners were too far in debt to close for longer than they absolutely had to. And in the year 2267, in a city that had grown almost entirely numb to sudden, senseless loss, a dead boy in an alleyway 3 streets over would have barely made the evening news. So a dead boy inside a family pizzeria, quietly and efficiently scrubbed from public memory by the same machine that ran everything else, made even less of one. The funeral was small. Inko had no other family left to call. Not really. An aunt in another prefecture who sent flowers and an apologetic card instead of herself. A father-in-law she hadn't spoken to in a decade. An ex-husband who didn't come at all and whom she never once considered calling. It was mostly her and a handful of Izuku's teachers who felt some obligation to show their faces, and, strangely, a few of his classmates' parents, drawn less by grief than by the uncomfortable gravity tragedy exerts on people who feel, however distantly, implicated in it. Katsuki Bakugo did not attend. Whether that was his own choice or one made for him by parents unwilling to explain the notebook, no one ever said. Inko stood at the front of a small room with an urn in front of her that felt, absurdly, both far too small and far too heavy, and said almost nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't come apart in her mouth before she finished saying it. She buried her son on a gray Wednesday afternoon with absolutely no knowledge. None, not the faintest suspicion, that anything of him had survived at all. As far as she would ever know, for longer than anyone could yet say, Izuku Midoriya had died exactly the way the reports said he had, quietly, senselessly, in a pizzeria that had no business being the last place her son ever stood. She went home that night to an apartment that had never once felt so large or so silent, and she sat for a long time on the edge of his bed, one hand resting on the spines of 31 ruined notebooks he'd never gotten to fill a 30-second time. And she did not turn on the television, because she could not yet bear the thought of some new hero's debut playing across the screen where her son's face used to light up every single time, without fail, no matter how bad the day behind it had been. 3 days blurred past the way grief tends to blur things, unevenly, without any real shape. Tuesday bleeding into Wednesday, bleeding into a Thursday that arrived, without announcing itself. At Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the day passed the way every day passed there now. Children pulling on animatronic ears, parents paying too much for lukewarm pizza, a tired staff moving through routines that had long since stopped requiring conscious thought. By 8 o'clock that evening, the last family had been ushered out the door, the heavy security gates locking down with their usual pneumatic hiss. By 9:30, the cleaning crew had finished their rush pass through the dining room and gone home for the night. And by 11:05, the digital clock above the prize counter ticking over 1 silent minute at a time, the pizzeria had settled into the particular, total silence that only ever exists in a building built for noise once all the noise has finally stopped. On the main stage, 3 shapes stood exactly where they always stood at closing, frozen, dormant, indistinguishable from any other night in the 3 decades this building had stood watch over this stretch of the city. Then, deep inside the central figure, something that had been waiting patiently, unknowingly, for 3 days finally stirred. Not electrical, not mechanical, something older than either. A spark. They are forever the gatekeeper, never the traveler. It began the way small fires always do. Not as flame yet, just heat. A single point of warmth kindling somewhere in a place that had no earthly business holding warmth of any kind. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and everyone knows me. The pre-recorded loop had played those same 11 seconds several 100,000 times since 1993, a bright, hollow little jingle built by a sound engineer who never once imagined anyone would actually be listening to it from the inside. It had no opinions. It had no fear. It was simply a waveform playing itself out to an empty room, the same way it did every night at exactly this point in the reboot CYCL, and it had not been built to survive contact with an actual person. So when Izuku Midoriya's soul, grieving, disoriented, still screaming faintly with the raw weight of everything it had just lost, slammed into the small, hollow space where that jingle lived, there was no fight, no negotiation. There was only a feeling far too large for the room it had been poured into, and the room simply couldn't hold its shape anymore. Fred why, Faz ear. There's plenty of delicious dash. The audio warped, folded in on itself, dropped an octave into something that no longer sounded cheerful at all. Pizzicatos, za, and then smaller, human, terrified, ugh, what happened? The eyelids fluttered. Blue costume eyes rolled back, replaced in an instant by a glossy, void-black surface, and two pinpricks of white light ignited at their centers. The unmistakable signature of a soul finally taking hold of the wheel. Where am I? Data flooded his vision all at once. And it wasn't sight, not really. It was numbers and diagrams layered directly over the dark, a heads-up display painting itself across reality whether he wanted it there or not. System diagnostic, online. Battery, 98%. Motor functions, optimal. Audio output, unstable. Somewhere underneath the panic, the part of Izuku's mind that had spent 14 years cataloging hero footage and quirk mechanics with obsessive precision immediately flagged the anomaly, because apparently that part of him had survived whatever else hadn't. I'm seeing binary. I'm seeing schematics of a room I don't recognize. Why? Concussion? Some kind of quirk effect? None of this makes sense. Why is this place so dark? He tried to lift a hand to rub his eyes, and instead heard the thin, mechanical whine of servo. Work click. He looked down. He wasn't holding a hand. He was holding a microphone, gripped tight in a massive, brown, furry paw. Whatever passed for breath in him, now, caught somewhere it shouldn't have been able to catch at all. He flexed a finger. The paw flexed. He rotated his wrist, slow and disbelieving, and felt the joint spin with a soft, lubricated hiss that had no business feeling as real as it did. What? Cold panic tried to seize him, but there was no heartbeat underneath it to race. He took a step back instead, and his foot came down with a heavy metallic clang against hollow wood, deafening in the silence. Is this a suit? A prank? His voice came out warped, glitching, a speaker with a loose wire behind it. Is this a bar? Why don't I remember getting here? He reached for a name, a face, anything solid to hold on to. Something surfaced for half a second, a woman's voice, humming low over the sound of something frying in a pan, warmth, a couch. Cats had eaten somewhere it wasn't supposed to be eaten, and then it was gone before he could close his hand around it. Gone the way a dream goes the instant you try to describe it out loud. Who am I? Driven by nothing but the need for an answer. Any answer, he stepped toward the edge of the stage. Clank. Thud. He'd misjudged the weight of this new body entirely, and the floorboards groaned under what had to be 400 pounds of frame, gyroscopes whirring hard to keep him upright. Hello. His voice echoed off checker tile and came back to him alone. Is anyone there? Only the low, indifferent hum of a vending machine answered. He walked the length of a wall-covered edge to edge in children's crayon drawings, his ocular sensors, high definition apparently, whatever that meant for him now, zooming in without being. Asked on a glossy poster near the end of it. A brown bear, a purple bunny, a yellow chicken. Freddy likes to party. In letters bright enough to hurt. He stared at the bear, the top hat, the bow tie, the microphone gripped in one paw, identical to the one in his own. He looked down at his own chest. Black bow tie. Freddy. The name tasted strange and half familiar on a voice box that had never spoken it before. Am I? Freddy. He turned back toward the stage, and only then noticed the two other towering shapes standing motionless in the shadows behind him, frozen mid-pose like statues someone had simply forgotten to finish. Huh, who are they? Curiosity beat out whatever fear was still trying to take root, and he crossed back toward the stage, the thud of his own footsteps settling, for the first time, into something almost rhythmic. He looked up at the purple rabbit and the yellow chicken. Lifeless. Fur and steel and nothing behind the eyes. Hello. He waved a hand in front of the rabbit's face. Who are you guys? Kin-UH. It happened before he'd even decided to let it happen. Izuku didn't just carry a soul. He'd carried his whole short life, an entire sun's worth of wanting. Wanting to help, wanting to matter, wanting someone, anyone, to reach back when he reached out first. That kind of wanting doesn't simply disappear because its owner has forgotten his own name. His spirit was a roaring bonfire crammed into a tea light, and standing there in the dark, alone, aching for even the smallest sign that he wasn't the only living thing left in the building, he let just a little too much of that bonfire show through. Emerald light, invisible to any eye that wasn't already halfway into the spirit world, sparked at his fingertips and didn't stay there. It rolled off him instead, a slow, warm tide that wasn't quite electricity and wasn't quite anything else either, spilling down off the stage and out across the dining room floor, curling under table legs and beneath the flickering glow of the arcade cabinets, sliding under a heavy curtain hanging across a boarded-off attraction clear on the far side of the room. A curtain Freddy, still finding his own footing in every sense of the phrase, hadn't even noticed yet. ZZZT click. The energy hit the rabbit and the chicken hardest, since they were closest, slipping straight past whatever passed for their programming and lighting something underneath it that had never been lit before. It wasn't possession. Freddy would understand that difference clearly later, once he had better words for it. What had been done to him, violent and forced and utterly without his consent, was nothing at all like what was happening here. This was closer to opening a window in a room that had simply never had one. A spark, offered rather than taken, landing on kindling that had been waiting all this time, blameless, for someone to finally come along and light it. The rabbit's ears twitched, one after the other, like a marionette's strings being tested. His jaw realigned with an audible snap, and behind eyelids that hadn't so much as flickered in longer than either of them could have said, magenta optics blinked slowly to life, focusing with visible effort on the enormous brown shape looming over him. Well, hey there. The voice that came out was smooth and unhurried, carrying a warm southern drawl that had absolutely no business coming out of decades-old animatronic hardware, and yet sounded, somehow, entirely natural, like it had always belonged there and was only now getting the chance to be used. He looked Freddy up and down with open, unbothered curiosity. Bear! Freddy jumped back so fast his internal fans spun audibly up to speed. Oh, you can talk. I reckon I can. The rabbit tested the flex of his fingers against the neck of a guitar slung across his chest, then looked around the dark dining room, confusion sliding in over the calm. But where in the tarnation am I? And why's my head feel like somebody rang it like a church bell? I don't know, Freddy admitted, and felt his own ears. His ears, apparently, now, droop with the admission. I woke up a few minutes ago. I think I'm a bear. You look like a bear, partner, the rabbit said, nodding slowly, as if confirming this out loud at whatever hour it currently was made all the sense in the world. Then something surfaced behind his eyes, the way a word surfaces on the tip of a tongue. And I feel like I remember a name. Bonnie. Reckon that's me, then. Could have been worse, I suppose. Bonnie, Freddy repeated, some old habit already cataloging the new information before he'd even had a name of his own to catalog anything under. Nice to meet you, Bonnie. I think the poster back there said I'm Freddy. Freddy. Bonnie tried the name out like he was testing a chord. Sounds right. Sounds like a fella who runs a tight ship, too. Suits you already, and we only just met. Before Freddy could decide whether that was a compliment, Something gasped to his right, a small, startled, entirely mechanical intake of air from lungs that didn't strictly need one. A bright, yellow head snapped upright, beak clacking twice. Oh my! The voice was high, bright, and instantly, helplessly cheerful even in the middle of what was clearly a small panic. The chicken looked down at her own hands. Wings, Freddy's mind corrected automatically. Their wings. Turned them over twice as if checking they still worked, then looked between the bear and the rabbit with wide, startled eyes. Well, hello. Strange, Bunny and Bear. Freddy's eyes had already settled back into their soft, ordinary blue, the white pinpricks fading as the last of his panic ebbed. I'm Freddy. This is Bonnie. And you are. She tilted her head, some internal database plainly spinning behind her eyes. Chica. Yes, definitely Chica. She said it like relief rather than certainty. I feel like I should be holding a cupcake. She looked down at her empty wings with genuine, wounded disappointment, as though someone had personally wronged her by not providing one immediately. It's very nice to meet you both. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Bonnie said, tipping an imaginary hat her way. Nice to meet you too. Chica glanced around the dark room and gave a small shiver, despite not being able to feel cold in any way that should have mattered. So where are we? Why is it so quiet? And why don't either of you seem to know any more than I do? Freddy found himself wanting, with an intensity that startled him, to have an actual answer ready, something solid enough to chase the thin edge of fear out of her voice. He didn't have one, but some part of him filed the wanting away anyway, the way it seemed to be filing away everything tonight, like it mattered more than almost anything else he'd cataloged so far. He never got the chance to try. The quiet shattered from the far side of the room instead. Behind a heavy curtain stitched with faded gold letters reading Pirate's Cove, and a smaller, hand-lettered sign beneath it that simply said out of order. The very same wave of warmth that had found Bonnie and Chica had gone curling in as well. Thinner by the time it arrived, slower, but more than enough. A third shape, slumped in the dark behind that curtain for longer than anyone still living could have said, twitched once, twice, and then all at once. If Bonnie's waking had been a slow surfacing, and Chica's a startled gasp, this was neither. It was a detonation. Whatever the wave had lit in him didn't ease into consciousness, so much as kick a door clean off its hinges, and he was up and moving before he'd finished understanding he had legs to move with. Thump, 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 screch. A crimson blur tore across the dining room floor, metal feet carving fresh grooves into decades of wax, and skidded to a halt directly in front of the stage hard enough that dust sifted down somewhere from the rafters. It was a fox, or had been built to look like one, long before time and small, careless hands had worn most of that illusion away. Tattered crimson, fur hung in patches over an endoskeleton exposed at the ribs, the chest, both legs. A hook gleamed where a right hand should have been. One good eye, wild and bright yellow, sat above a jaw hanging slightly loose on its hinge, and an eye patch, flipped up rather than down, as if he'd never seen much point in actually covering the eye underneath, bounced with every motion of his head. Yar. Hello, me lads. The voice was rough, scraping, two gears grinding without enough oil between them, and it vibrated with an energy that made even Bonnie and Chica look faintly tired just standing near it. Hello. I guess. A name surfaced at the corner of Freddy's HUD the instant he focused on the newcomer, small and glowing, the same way Freddy and Bonnie and Chica had each surfaced before it. Foxy. Aye, that be me name, laddie. Foxy grinned wide, showing off a mismatched set of sharp gold and white teeth, several missing outright, and looked between the three of them with his chest heaving over a breath he didn't technically need to catch. Whole crew's up and move in, then. Didn't figure I'd be waking to company tonight, of all nights. He tapped his hook once against his own chest, right over the worst of the tear across it, and a few faint sparks jumped to the contact. Felt something crack, clean up me spine, not 2 minutes past, like lightning down a mast in a storm. Was still getting me legs under me proper when I heard the lot of ye out here jabbering away. Figured, well, devil take it. May as well come see who else got struck by the same bolt. Freddy's processor, apparently incapable of staying quiet about a structural concern for more than a few seconds, even in the middle of a supernatural crisis, fixed immediately on the tear across Foxy's chest. "Foxy, why do you look destroyed? Your endoskeleton's exposed clean through in at least 3 places. That can't be good for your wiring, especially with the humidity in a room this size." Foxy looked down at himself, tapped a loose wire with his hook, and sparks jumped again. "Yar, couldn't tell ye, Captain," he said, almost cheerfully, entirely unbothered by his own condition. "Feels like I've been through Cannon Blast. It does. I might drafty, if I'm honest, but nothing a fox can't sail through." "So," Bonnie scratched at one long purple ear, the joint underneath scraping faintly. "Where in the world are we? And what are we exactly? We ain't human. Pretty sure of that much." Freddy closed his eyes, an entirely unnecessary gesture for optics that didn't need to blink, but one that felt right anyway, and reached for something he couldn't have named an hour ago and somehow already knew exactly how to use. A faint list of nearby wireless networks scrolled across the edge of his vision, every one of them locked behind encryption he had neither the time nor, yet, the tools to break. But the network names alone told him enough. From what I can read off the walls, and off the network broadcasting out of whatever's running this building's registers. His voice slid, without his quite noticing, into something steady and almost professorial. "We're at a place called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a restaurant, an entertainment venue built for families." He turned his hands over slowly, studying them. "And we, with entertainment, animatronics, like robots?" Chica asked, tilting her head so far it looked almost uncomfortable. "Advanced robotics, I guess," Freddy corrected, though something in his chest ached quietly, for no reason he could name, at the word. "But that doesn't explain the rest of it. Robots don't think. They don't get confused or scared." Or he glanced at Chica, sad about a missing cupcake. "Whatever we are, we're doing something robots shouldn't be able to do." Bonnie shrugged. "Maybe we're just real fancy, is all. Future tech. Ain't like any of us even know what year it is." "Maybe," Freddy murmured, though he didn't sound convinced, and turned instead toward a hallway at the far end of the dining room where a small lit sign read security office. If this is a working business, there has to be staff somewhere. A night guard, specifically, someone paid to watch over expensive equipment while the building's closed. That would explain the silence. We might not be as alone in here as we think. "Foxy's good," I narrowed. "A human? Won't we scare the poor landlubber half to death? Look at me, lad. I'm a fright even to myself." "Yeah," Bonnie agreed. "And a giant talking bird ain't exactly subtle either, no offense, Freddy. Fella takes one look at the 4 of us, and he's liable to run screaming for the hills. Or worse, come at us swinging." Freddy ran the scenario forward before he'd even decided to, the way his mind now seemed to insist on doing with everything, invited or not. A frightened stranger. A dark room. For unfamiliar shapes suddenly moving where nothing should move. If the guard startled badly enough, and if he happened to carry a quirk bill for exactly this kind of moment, fire or ice or brute strength, anything at all, the 4 of them could be scrap on the floor before a single word got out. They needed information first, not a fight nobody here actually wanted. "Good point," he said finally. "Since none of us look remotely human, and we don't know yet whether this person is friendly, dangerous, or just tired and unlucky enough to be working the graveyard shift, we can't risk walking up and introducing ourselves. Not yet. So what's the plan, Freddy?" "We pretend. For now." Freddy's eyes glowed faintly as he looked between the 3 of them, something settling into his voice that hadn't been there a minute ago. Steady, sure of itself in a way the rest of him still very much wasn't. "We act like ordinary animatronics. We stay on our marks. We watch this person quietly and figure out what kind of man he is before we ever let him know we can talk back. If he seems safe, if there's ever a moment we can approach without putting him in danger of panicking into something worse, then we try. But until we're sure it's safe, we play the part." Foxy chuckled, tapping his hook against his own leg. "Sneaky. I like it, Captain. A proper stealth mission." "Okie dokie," Chica chirped. "I can stand still. I'm very good at standing still." "All right," Bonnie said, and there was something steadying in just how easily he said it, like he'd already decided, whoever they were, wherever they were, that following this bear's lead was the sensible move. Works for me. Freddy hesitated, just for a second, something uncertain flickering behind the borrowed blue of his eyes. I don't actually know if I'm right about any of this, he admitted, quieter than he meant to. I don't know why it should be me deciding what we do. I woke up an hour ago, same as the rest of you. Chica reached over, an instinctive, entirely unnecessary gesture, given that neither of them could feel warmth through their casings the way they once might have, and rested a wing against his arm anyway. You've got the most answers so far, she said simply. That's plenty good enough for right now. Foxy clapped his hook against Freddy's shoulder hard enough to ring faintly. Cap'n S Captain till somebody better comes along, laddie. Ain't complicated. It wasn't much. It was, all the same, the first thing that had felt steady to Freddy since he'd opened his eyes in the dark, and he found himself grateful for it in a way that surprised him more than almost anything else that had happened so far tonight. All right, he said, and felt something like natural leadership settle over him. Unfamiliar, and yet somehow already comfortable, like a coat that fit before he'd even tried it on. Everyone, back to your spots. Assume sleep mode posture, but keep your sensors active. Wait for the clock to hit midnight. That's usually when shifts start. They nodded, a unison of whirring motors. Bonnie and Chica hopped back up onto the stage and froze into their rigid positions. Foxy sprinted for his cove, the curtain drawing shut behind him with a soft rasp. Freddy took his place center stage, adjusted his bow tie, gripped his microphone, and locked his joints still. The pizzeria fell silent again. But in the dark, four pairs of eyes stayed wide open, watching, waiting for the front doors to open. The digital clock above the prize counter clicked over to 12:10 a.m., and for a long, uneventful hour after that, nothing in the dining hall moved at all. It wasn't for lack of trying. For sets of eyes tracked the front entrance from behind the stillness of frozen joints and locked servos, watching the glass doors with the kind of focus that made the waiting feel enormous. Though from the outside, to anyone who might have glanced in, it would have looked like exactly what it was supposed to look like. 3 animatronics, and a fourth in a curtained-off cove, motionless, harmless, asleep. Then the front chimes rang, soft and electronic, and a set of heavy boots scuffed against the linoleum. A middle-aged man came through the entrance in a slightly ill-fitting purple security uniform, the kind that had clearly been tailored for someone a size smaller at some point in its life and never quite adjusted for the person currently wearing it. He had a thick, unkempt black beard, dark circles carved so deep under his eyes they looked almost bruised, and the particular gray, hollowed-out posture of a man whose body had long ago given up on the idea of a normal sleep schedule and simply learned to keep moving anyway. He was scrolling through his phone as he walked, the pale glow washing out what little color was left in his face, his frown already set for the night before he'd even reached the dining room. On the stage, the stillness cracked by a fraction. The microscopic whir of a single servo, nothing a human ear could have caught. Freddy's blue eyes didn't drift toward the sound the way a normal head might. They snapped, sharp and immediate, locking onto the intruder the instant he crossed the threshold. A half-second later, Bonnie's magenta optics and Chica's dark violet gaze followed suit. 3 sets of eyes fixed on one exhausted man who had absolutely no idea he was being watched. Target identified, Freddy's HUD flagged, clean and clinical, the same tone it might have used to label a chair or a light fixture. Employee. Night guard. Approaching from primary entrance. Is that the fella? Bonnie's voice came through on some internal channel Izuku hadn't consciously built and somehow already knew how to use, quieter than the hum of the vending machines behind them. I don't know yet, Freddy answered. Voice modulator dropped as low as it would go. Wait, my sensors are picking up an elevated heart rate. Shallow breathing, too. He's not sick, he's just exhausted. Look at his posture. He looks tired, Chica murmured, her head tilting with a soft click of internal gears. Like he needs a cupcake. Or a nap. Possibly both at the same time, somehow. Can't argue that, Freddy said, cross-referencing what little he already understood about human biology against the clock. Adults need somewhere around 8 hours of sleep a night for the body to function properly. Working this shift every night would disrupt that completely: circadian rhythm, cortisol regulation, all of it. He's likely running on fumes just to be standing upright right now. So the poor fella just ain't slept right in who knows how long. Bonnie said, something genuinely sympathetic slipping into his drawl despite the circumstances. Chill. Freddy's internal gyroscope kept him rigid without conscious effort, the way breathing might have once been automatic for a body that no longer breathed. He's getting close. Initiate sleep mode. Freeze. All three animatronics locked their joints in the same instant, becoming, for all outward appearances, nothing more than three unusually elaborate pieces of dead machinery, standing exactly where they always stood. Davis Ramirez did not notice any of it. He was far too occupied cursing quietly at his phone screen to spare the stage a second glance. SHD, why the hell does Zaji want maintenance done at midnight? He muttered, kicking a stray paper party hat clean across the linoleum without breaking stride. We don't even clean these DMN things regular. Half of them are held together with duct tape and prayer as it is. Look at this. He stopped in front of the stage, still scowling at his phone, and clicked on a flashlight without looking up, aiming it directly into Freddy's face on pure habit. Freddy, Izuku, somewhere underneath all that fur and animatronic plating, felt the sudden flood of brightness wash across his optical sensors and didn't so much as flinch. It took every scrap of willpower he had, standing there letting a beam of light burn straight into his eyes without reacting. But 400 pounds of borrowed body had apparently come with an equally borrowed capacity for stillness, and he used every bit of it. Freddy's still got that handprint smudge on his eye from the brat at table for last week. Davis sighed, rubbing his temple with his free hand. Whatever. Let's just get through the checkup fast so I can get back to the office and call Kat before she thinks I forgot again. If I miss our check-in 2 nights running, she's actually going to murder me, and I will deserve it. He dropped a heavy tool bag onto the stage with a loud, careless thud, dug out a ratchet and a hex key, and climbed up without a shred of ceremony, standing close enough to the 400 P&D bear that a more nervous man might have thought twice about. I've worked here 2 years, and this is only the second time I've had to crack one of you open, Davis muttered, more to himself than to anyone listening, though someone very much was. Creepy BSDRDS, every one of you. No offense. He reached behind Freddy's bow tie, found the hidden release without needing to look for it, and pressed. His click. Freddy's chest cavity swung open on hydraulic hinges, and Izuku's mind, apparently incapable of not analyzing something the second it was placed in front of him, whatever else had changed about him tonight, seized on it immediately. I didn't know I could do that. Fascinating. A chaotic weave of wiring, structural crossbeams, some kind of localized power core near the center. He resisted, with real effort, the urge to actually look down at his own open chest with anything more than his peripheral vision, since a curious animatronic staring at its own guts was exactly the sort of thing Davis was here to not see. I'm hollow, and yet, somehow, I'm alive inside all of this. If this technology really is as old as it looks, nearly 300 years, if the founding date on that plaque by the door is accurate, it's remarkably durable for its age. Primitive by modern standards, certainly, but built to last. Davis, for his part, seemed entirely unmoved by the marvel of it. He just looked annoyed, the way a man looks annoyed at a leaking faucet he's fixed 100 times before and expects to have to fix 100 times again. He jammed the wrench into the open cavity, found a loose bolt along the ribbing, and started tightening it with the brisk, joyless efficiency of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. Hold still, big guy, Davis grunted, twisting harder. Freddy felt the pressure of it. Not pain, not exactly, but a strange, dull tension radiating through the joint, and some part of his brain that had spent 14 years obsessively cataloging the mechanics of everything around him did the math on pure instinct. He's over-tightening the thoracic strut, maybe 15% past spec. If he keeps going at that rate, he's going to SDRP the screw entirely, and then he'll be back here doing this exact repair again in a month. He almost said something. He caught himself half a second before his mouth opened. Because, hey, you're over-torquing, that was not a sentence a frozen animatronic was supposed to have any opinion about, let alone voice. Davis finished, wiped his greasy hands on his uniform pants, and slammed the chest plate shut. Clang. Good enough for government work, he sighed, already turning to put the wrench back in his bag, back fully to the bear now, utterly unguarded. Freddy's mind raced. The freeze protocol was screaming at him to stay silent, stay still, stay exactly what Davis expected him to be. But there was something else in him, too. Something older than the protocol, something that had been there long before tonight, long before any of this. And it was apparently considerably louder. Excuse me? Hello. The words came out glitchy, deep, warped at the edges like a speaker with a loose wire, but unmistakably, undeniably words. Davis froze mid-motion. His shoulders went rigid. His voice cracked on the single syllable. He turned, slow, gripping his flashlight now like it might double as a weapon if it came to that. Hello? Who said that? Is somebody in here? Mister. Freddy raised one massive paw, pointing with as much gentleness as 400 pounds of animatronic could apparently manage. Behind you. Davis turned around, slower this time, and found himself close enough to the bear's face that he could see every individual, deliberate detail of it. The half-closed eyes, the wide, painted-on smile, and now, impossibly, a soft blue glow behind those eyes that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Freddy had leaned forward without quite meaning to, his jaw unhinging slightly to speak, and it was, from Davis's angle, an extremely bad moment for a giant bear to lean toward him at all. Wait, Freddy said quickly, raising both paws in what he hoped read as a gesture of peace and not, say, the opening move of an attack. Please don't yell. Ah! The scream tore through the empty pizzeria loud enough to vibrate in Freddy's own audio receptors, bouncing off every hard surface in the dining room twice over. What the F? Davis didn't fight. He didn't even properly run at first. He scrambled backward, tripped clean over his own tool bag, hit the floor, and then somehow converted the fall into a full sprint on all fours like a startled crab before his legs caught up and got him properly upright, bolting for the hallway at a speed his exhausted, 34-year-old body had clearly not attempted in years. Wait, Freddy called after him, stepping forward despite himself. Thud, thud. I simply wish to communicate. Get away from me, you demonic fur rug. Davis didn't slow down for a response. He dove through the security office door and slammed it behind him with the force of a man who genuinely believed his life depended on the next half-second. Slam. The lock engaged with a heavy, decisive chunk. Freddy stood alone in the middle of the dining room, ears drooping in a way that felt entirely involuntary. Please, no cursing, Dimon. Bonnie leaned over from the stage, his guitar neck knocking gently against the abandoned microphone stand. Well, he drawled, watching the empty hallway where Davis had disappeared. That did not go well. At all. He's fast for a man with what I'm fairly sure is high cholesterol, Chica observed, tilting her head with genuine, unbothered curiosity. We have to calm him down, Freddy said, already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way he apparently couldn't help but do about almost anything. He's the authority figure in this building. If we start this relationship with him terrified of us, that's the relationship we'll be stuck with, and that benefits absolutely nobody. Chica and Bonnie nodded. Foxy's curtain twitched. Clearly he'd heard the whole thing from his cove and had chosen, for once, not to insert himself into the middle of a stranger's cardiac episode, and the 3 of them made their way down the hallway together. A rhythmic, unhurried clank, clank, clank of heavy footsteps that would have terrified Davis considerably more if he'd had the presence of mind left to notice the pacing of it. They crowded around the wide, safety glass window of the security office. Inside, Davis was pressed flat against the back wall, hyperventilating, clutching a small silver crucifix in one white-knuckled hand and his phone in the other like it might somehow call in reinforcements. Freddy tapped gently against the glass. Tink, tink. Wait, Mr. Ramirez, he said, his voice muffled but steady through the barrier. I promise you, we are not going to hurt you. I don't believe that. Davis roared, sweat cutting tracks down his face. Robots don't talk. You're haunted. I quit. I'm suing. I'm suing everyone. Please don't cuss around us, Freddy said, gently but with a real note of scolding underneath it, the kind of tone that seemed to surprise even him as it came out. It's rude. And, to introduce myself properly, I'm Freddy. And you are? Davis blinked, thrown so completely off balance by the sheer, absurd politeness of the question that some of the raw terror in his face gave way. Just slightly to confusion. Oh, what? I'm Davis. Davis Ramirez. Well, it's nice to meet you, Davis, Freddy said, his mechanical features working through what was clearly meant to be a reassuring smile and landing somewhere closer to unsettling, though the sentiment behind it was plainly sincere. Now, I'm Bonnie. Introduce yourself, would you? Freddy stepped politely aside. Bonnie pressed his purple face right up against the glass, magenta eyes wide and friendly. Name's Bonnie the Bunny, he said, smooth as anything, like he was greeting a regular at a bar he'd worked for 20 years instead of a terrified stranger on the worst night of his professional life. Your fellow rock and roller. Pleasure to meet you, Davis. You wouldn't happen to have any carrot cake stashed back there, would you? Chica popped up next to him without waiting to be introduced, waving one wing enthusiastically. I'm Chica. So nice to meet you, Mr. Ramirez. You look like you could really use a hug, if I'm being honest. From the second, smaller window on the office's other side, a hook rapped twice against the glass. Scrape. Davis nearly left the floor entirely. Name be Foxy. The pirate barked, gold tooth catching the dim light. Nice to meet ye, Night Watchman Davis. Ye be looking a bit pale there, lad. Something troubling ye? Davis looked between all four of them, the bear, the rabbit, the chicken, and now apparently a talking pirate fox as well. And something in his overloaded brain simply stopped trying to process the sheer number of things wrong with this picture all at once. They weren't pounding on glass. They weren't shrieking or clawing or doing any of the things his imagination had already sketched out in vivid, horrifying detail during his sprint down the hallway. They were introducing themselves. Politely. Okay, Davis said slowly, lowering the crucifix a few inches. If I come out there, you're not going to hurt me? Stop cursing around us, buddy, Bonnie warned, ears twitching with what looked like real, if mild, offense. And our programming, or whatever this is that's running us now, seems to prevent us from physically harming a human being, Freddy added, with the calm certainty of someone reciting something he was fairly sure of and hoping very much was true. It's in the safety protocols. I checked best I could. 'Tis true, Foxy confirmed solemnly, nodding once. Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Fazbear Safety Manual, if memory serves. Not that any of us has properly read the thing, mind, but it feels true enough in the bones. Davis stared at all four of them through the glass for a long, heavy minute, weighing, visibly, on his exhausted, expressive face, the relative merits of a career-ending scream and flee versus simply accepting that his life had, as of tonight, become considerably stranger than it had been yesterday. Finally, he sighed a long, ragged, defeated sound and unlocked the door. Stepping out into the hallway made the size difference land properly for the first time. Freddy towered over him, easily 2.5 feet taller, 400 pounds of animatronic bulk that could have ended this conversation in half a second if it had wanted to. Davis looked up at him and felt, for just a moment, genuinely, uncomfortably small. So, Davis, Freddy said, crossing his massive arms, an oddly casual gesture from something so large. You look like you have questions. I sure effing do, Davis breathed, reaching automatically for a pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket before remembering, with visible disappointment, that he couldn't smoke inside. He settled for crossing his own arms instead, mirroring the bear without quite meaning to. How are you like this? Talking, moving, whatever the hell you're doing right now. And how long has this been happening? We don't really know, Freddy admitted, looking down at his own paws like they might have an answer he was missing. I woke up on the stage. My internal chronometer says that was approximately 1 hour ago. We crew were hoping you might know something, lad, Foxy added, his eye patch flipping up and down with what might have been genuine hope. Seeing, as you're the only human currently present to ask. 1 hour, Davis rubbed both hands down his face slowly. Jesus F, you really aren't that old, are you? STO, Bonnie started, already bracing. If you say stop cursing one more goddamn time, Davis snapped, jabbing a finger up at the rabbit. I swear to every god I don't believe in, I will lock this place up right now and leave all 4 of you standing here in the dark. It's midnight. There's not a single kid within a mile of this building. So I will say whatever the hell I please. Capiche? Bonnie considered this, blinked once, and shrugged with total, easy acceptance. Okay, buddy. You're the boss. So, Freddy said, steering things gently back before the conversation could derail entirely. I overheard you earlier, while you were tightening the strut of my chest. You mentioned you've worked here 2 years. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking? That's kind of none of your damn business. Davis grumbled automatically, leaning back against the hallway wall. And then, after a beat, softened, because apparently something about the situation had already worn down whatever instinct he had left to guard his privacy from a giant talking bear. But sure, why the hell not? I'm literally talking to a bear right now. Pretty sure I've already lost whatever's left of my dignity for the evening. Yeah, 2 years here. I'm 34. So you started here at 32? Chica asked, tilting her head with such open, guileless curiosity that Davis found himself answering before he decided to. Yeah, God, you sound so dim and innocent when you ask that. He shook his head slowly. I haven't worked a single day shift here since my interview. I live in the dark, basically. Vampire hours. Who's Cat? Bonnie asked. You mentioned her earlier, back when you thought you were alone. Something in Davis's face shifted. Not soft exactly, but closer to it than anything he'd shown yet tonight. He pulled his phone out and tapped the screen without much hesitation, turning it to show them a photo of a woman with warm brown eyes and an easy, genuine smile, caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame. Cat, he said. My girlfriend. How long have you two been together? Freddy asked, tilting his own head to study the photo with real interest. About 7 years now. 7 years. Bonnie whistled low, genuinely impressed. Well, hell, fella. You've got yourself a good one, then. That's not nothing. Yeah, Davis said. And for just a second, something almost like a real smile tugged at the corner of his mouth beneath the beard. I've been meaning to propose. Sometime in the next year, probably. Or whenever I actually get around to it. Money's tight right now, so we're not rushing anything. He put the phone away, and the small warmth flickered back down into something more guarded. Anyway, enough about me. Freddy looked around the darkened hallway, the peeling paint, a flickering overhead bulb someone clearly should have replaced months ago, and his mind, apparently unable to stop itself, started quietly running numbers on the state of the building, even while the rest of him focused on the conversation. What do we do exactly? I worked out what I am, more or less. But we're still fairly lost on what we're actually meant to be doing here. Davis stared at him. Wow, that was blunt as hell. He sighed, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, looking up at all 4 of them from below for the first time. Fine. Here's what I actually know, for whatever it's worth. You're artificially engineered mechanical entities, built to run through a set list of actions automatically, singing, dancing, telling jokes that stopped being funny sometime around the Clinton administration. He waved a hand vaguely up and down at all of them. You're animatronics, made to look lifelike enough to pass for real. Movable joints, working voice boxes, all wrapped up in fabric and hard plastic shells. I don't know the specifics of how any of the actual tech works, and honestly, I don't care. He looked Freddy dead in the eye. You're built for entertainment. Restaurants, birthday parties, places like this one. That's the whole job description. You're glorified toys. Freddy processed this slowly. Toys. Entertainment. Purpose. Bring joy to people. Is this place doing good business? Davis laughed. A dry, humorless bark of a sound. We're scraping by. But unless something changes, we're probably closing within a year. Owners are underwater. I'll be out of job, right along with the rest of this building. He dropped his head into his hands. God damn it. But hey, I'll milk this job for whatever's left of it. right up until the day it actually happens. Gotta have something to live on till the next one comes along. Foxy leaned down, one yellow eye narrowing with something almost like sympathy. Ye seem like a rather depressed bandit, laddie. Mostly, Davis said with a shrug, entirely unbothered by the diagnosis. Or I've just stopped giving a SHD about much of anything. Hard to tell the difference some days. Freddy's deep voice rumbled slightly in his own chest cavity as he leaned down, his shadow falling long across the smaller man. So, what's your quirk, Davis? Something in Davis flinched, visibly, and he looked away, down at the checkered floor tiles like they'd suddenly become the most interesting thing in the building. He dug a cheap plastic lighter out of his pocket and held it out on an open palm. Might as well tell you, he muttered, and there was a whole lifetime of quiet resentment folded into those 5 words. It's a bad thing to admit, but whatever. His brow furrowed with visible effort, a vein standing out faintly at his temple, and slowly, shakily, wobbling like it was caught in a gale nobody else could feel. The lighter rose 2 full inches off his palm before clattering back down. I've got a real weak telekinesis quirk, Davis spat, shoving the lighter back in his pocket like it had personally wronged him. Called it minor lift when I registered it, if you can believe that. It doesn't grow. It never has. I can't lift anything heavier than a house cat, and I can't move it faster than a crawl even then. Something in Freddy's chest, no heartbeat there too, actually ache, and yet the sensation was unmistakable regardless, pulled tight in a way he had no memory to explain. He didn't know why Davis's small, defeated demonstration hit him the way it did. He only knew that it did, sharp and immediate and entirely without a source he could point to, an old wound with no scar visible to explain where it had come from. Put me right in the bully's path back in school, Davis went on, laughing bitterly, kicking one boot idly against the baseboard. In a world full of explosions and giant women stepping over cars, the guy who can barely float a pencil across a desk is a punchline. Spent half of high school getting shoved into lockers over it. But hey, he looked up, eyes gone flat and tired in a way that made him look considerably older than 34. Who gives SHD, right? Chica started forward, beak clicking, wing half raised. We do. F that. Davis cut her off, voice hardening instantly, the small vulnerability slamming shut as fast as it had opened. He stood back up straighter, jabbing a finger toward Freddy's nose. Look, I don't need pity from a giant chicken, all right? I care about one thing, and it's whether I still have a job tomorrow. That's it. So here's the deal, and I need all 4 of you to actually listen. He stepped closer, craning his neck up at the 4 towering shapes surrounding him. During the day, Davis said, his voice shaking slightly but holding firm underneath it, you stay the hell on that stage. You do your act exactly the way you're built to do it, and you do not move a muscle outside of it. If some kid yanks on your ear hard enough to hurt, you take it. If somebody's kid spills an entire soda down your front, you take it. If you move, if any customer catches so much as 1 second of you actually being alive in there, people are going to panic. Heroes are going to show up. You'll get taken apart and scrapped for parts, and I will lose my paycheck, and I will genuinely, personally kill every one of you myself before that happens. Are we clear? Freddy turned that over. Protocol, survival, objective, maintain cover at all costs until we understand this world better than we do right now. Understood, he said, gears in his neck whirring softly as he nodded. And at night, Davis continued, tone shifting, some of the hard edge softening back into something drier, sadder, tinged with a loneliness he clearly hadn't meant to let show. We can, I don't know, hang out, I guess. Have a beer. Watch whatever's on the office monitors. Swap stories, since apparently I'm doing this whole overnight shift with actual company for the first time in 2 years. He dropped the sarcasm entirely for a moment, looking each of them in the eye in turn. But that's the deal. Day, nothing. Night, fine. Got it, you dumbass. The 4 animatronics exchanged a glance, some silent, wordless current passing between them that hadn't existed an hour ago, and now felt like it had always been there. Affirmative, Freddy said. You got yourself a deal, Captain, Foxy said, offering a small, surprisingly formal bow. Okie dokie. Chica chirped. Works for me. Bonnie agreed easily. Good. Davis exhaled, and something in his shoulders actually loosened, tension bleeding out of him for the first time all night. We open at 8 tomorrow evening, so you're all back on that stage by 6 a.m. sharp for the morning systems check, same as always. Got it. Yes, Freddy confirmed. Good. Davis rubbed at his temples, already turning to walk back toward his office. Now I've got a mountain of paperwork and bills to deal with, since this dead stretch is the only time of night I get to touch any of it without the owner breathing down my neck about it. He muttered under his breath as he walked, half to himself, half to no one. Electricity's up 10% this quarter. Suppliers threatening to cut the pepperoni order if we don't pay down the balance. Jesus Christ. Freddy's eyes glowed faintly as Davis passed, his high-speed optical sensors catching and freezing an image of the crumpled invoice sticking out of Davis's back pocket before the man had gone 3 more steps. Text recognition. Active. A moment later, the analysis resolved itself cleanly across his HUD. The building is overpaying for electricity specifically during peak evening hours. Cycling the backup generator at 4 a.m. instead would likely cut costs by roughly 12%. He filed it away without saying anything. Davis had enough on his plate tonight, without a bear casually solving his utility bill for him an hour after nearly having a heart attack. There would be time for that later, Freddy decided. Tonight was for smaller things. Now, Davis said, reaching his office door and stepping through it, go F yourselves. Politely. Good night. Slam. The lobby went quiet again, save for the low hum of ventilation somewhere overhead. Bonnie scratched at one long purple ear, the metal joints scraping softly against fabric. Davis sure has a mouth on him, fellas. He's not wrong, though, Freddy said, turning back to face the others, the last of the glowing white in his eyes fading back down to that same soft, friendly blue. It doesn't matter that it's night. We're still awake. We're still here. He looked out over the empty dining room, the dark arcade cabinets, the dusty tables, the whole quiet, waiting building, and felt something stir in him that he had no memory to attach a name to, though it felt distantly, like the shape of an old, familiar hope finding somewhere new to land. Let's figure out what to do, Freddy said. We have 6 hours until sunrise. Let's go inspect our home. This marks the end of part 1 of What If Deku Had Rebirth as Freddy Fazbear. A big thanks to Mr. Wonder King 12 for granting the permission to feature this amazing fanfiction. Please like the video and subscribe to Deku Universe for more interesting stories. Thank you and see you soon.